And so I want to thank all of them for being here today. We've got a couple good announcements, but I don't think anyone can say that Florida has not had huge focus on education, certainly since I've been governor. We're proud to be ranked #1 in education freedom, #1 for parent involvement in education, #1 for public higher education, and then we have been, we're in the top on overall education, have been #1, 2, 3 on that, depending on the publication. We've really stood up for the rights of parents to direct the education and upbringing of their kids. We've empowered parents to make sure that they know that the curriculum is sound and in accordance with state standards. We want our kids to learn to add and subtract and learn how to read and write and all the basic stuff. We don't need teachers telling our kids that they were born in the wrong gender or wrong body, or doing things like we've seen, unfortunately, take hold in schools across the country. We also don't want our schools to be cadres of ideological indoctrination, and we've led the nation in giving parents and students protections against that. We've also led the nation in school choice. So we have universal school choice in Florida, regardless of your income. Parents have an opportunity to make a meaningful choice about where their kids go to school. And it's not just private scholarships, which obviously that program does. We're #1 for supporting homeschooling in Florida. We also have the most robust charter school program in the entire country, and we just did legislation through the budget that is going to expand and modernize our Schools of Hope program. So you're going to start to see real significant investment in areas that are more blighted and have had really trouble standing up good schools. So that's, I think, a really success story. And of course, no state does better for children with unique abilities than the state of Florida. Those are huge benefits that parents get, and I know it's been a lifeline for so many. So as of now, we have about 1.4 million students that are utilizing some form of school choice options. And what's happened over the years, when I was growing up across the bay, you're in wherever you are, that's just where you went pretty much. Then they kind of started doing like, okay, you have an IB program, maybe you can have now parents can choose within a lot of school districts, have a lot of choices amongst those schools as well. So that is really putting parents and families in the driver's seats. We really like that. We're, as I said, very supportive of homeschooling. The number of students getting homeschooling has increased by almost 60% during my administration. And we're not telling you have to do it, but I think a lot of parents, you work hard to have values and certain things you want to instill in your kids, and going to traditional schools, you are turning them over for 8 hours a day, to a different thing. And sometimes that can be great if you're in a great school or whatever, but I know there's some parents that are just like, you know what, I'm going to take the reins of this. We only get one shot at this. We're going to do it. And that's a choice that we absolutely respect and support when they make that decision. So I don't think there's a single state in the country that's better for homeschooling than the state of Florida. Our school grades have had significant increase. We recently announced that 71% of all of our graded schools are now either A or B schools, which exceeds our performance last year significantly, where we had 64% earn A or B rankings. And so part of the reason I think we've been able to do this is we tried to look at what was Florida doing well, what it needed to do better. And one of the things that we did well over the years, going back probably, I think, 20 years, was you can't just say, go to school, whatever, everything's great. Like, you need to know, like, are kids actually learning things? Are the standards being met? Does graduating from high school mean something? So Florida made sure that there was accountability, so that school districts would be held accountable, individual schools would be held accountable. Now, how you do that measurement and that accountability, there's room for debate on that. So we had a situation where that accountability and the measurement was done on one high-stakes end-of-the-year exam. And it was interesting because, Richard was our education commissioner my first term as governor, and he would tell me, like, last few weeks is all just about preparing for the exam. And I'm like, well, like I remember being a student, when you cram for an exam and then you take it, then you forget it really right after that. That's just kind of how it works. So, and then if you don't do well on the exam, you're on summer vacation. So how is anyone going to be able to do remediation? So Richard really helped lead on the innovation of why, instead of doing one end of year test, why don't we do progress monitoring, where you have periodic assessments throughout the school year, not as high stakes, but important, and then you can have remediation if the student isn't doing well. The parent can be informed, the teacher can do things. And so that has been something where we've seen it work really significantly. And I think, and both Stassi and Richard can chime in if they disagree, but I think the view of parents and teachers is overwhelmingly that this is a superior method than what was being done before. And I think we do have the data to support that. Now, part of what we wanted to do, and this is an initiative we started when Richard was Commissioner of Education, is we understand the importance of having high standards, we understand the importance of having good curriculum, we understand the importance of having parents' rights respected, but it really does make a difference if you have a good teacher in the classroom. I mean, that can inspire a student to want to learn more, to get interested in certain subjects, and while no one's going to ever get rich being a teacher, the reality is we want to do to make it more attractive than it has been in the past in the state of Florida. So we launched an initiative that would send some of our education money to the school districts that we send, but say it has to be used to increase teacher salaries. Because normally they'd send money, we send money down, billions and billions a year, school districts kind of use it. And so say, oh, increase education funding because you need more pay for teachers. Well, you can do that at the state level, and without our program, it doesn't guarantee there's going to be any increase in teacher salaries. So our teacher categorical, we've now done billions of dollars that is sent to school districts with strings attached, quite frankly, saying, here's money, you can only use it for teacher pay. And so you've seen teacher pay be able to be increased. And that's just what the state's doing. These local districts, they can add on top of that. They're not limited to that. So we signed a budget in Florida. It was the highest per pupil spending that we've ever had, but I asked in my budget recommendations for an increase in our teacher pay program. And so we wanted an increase so that the total program got up to $1.5 billion. When we rolled it out with Richard, was it $500 million when we started, $600 million? So we wanted to get up to $1.5 billion. Now the Florida Senate was supportive of that position. Florida House was not. So there was a compromise, and it ended up being about $1.35 billion. So that's over $100 million additional to what we've been doing for teacher pay. And I think that that's something that's really significant. We're going to say something more about that in a second. One thing before I do our main announcement is just highlight our commitment to civics education. I don't care what line of work you're going to go into. I don't care what you want to do for higher ed or not higher ed or vocational or anything. Everybody who leaves our K-12 system will be called upon to exercise the duties of being and responsibilities of being a citizen of this republic. And that should mean something. There's a lot of people that have given a lot so that we would have the opportunity to be living in a free country and fighting for those values. So I think it's important that people aren't just blank slates when they get out of here, that they actually understand what went into the foundations of America, what are those enduring principles that our country has stood for, and also how that can inform their view of the 250th anniversary, which is coming up next summer, and we've been doing a lot to build up to that. So I think we are in the business of not just trying to prepare students for certain higher education opportunities, certain vocations, which, obviously that's part of it, but I do think we're in the business of ensuring that we're producing good citizens and people that are going to take those responsibilities seriously. It's my view that when you learn about what went into the founding of America, when you learn about the ideas that were discussed and that are reflected in the Declaration of Independence and Constitution, invariably students are going to be glad that they're here in the United States of America. Because, it's just like it says, there's nothing new under the sun. Ecclesia, there's nothing new under the sun. Founders knew what they were doing. 1787, 1788, those debates till now. There's been a lot of technological change. There's been a lot of things that have happened, but really human nature has not changed. The relationship between individuals and the government, the source of rights, hasn't changed. And so they studied the whole backdrop of human history. They studied every republic. They studied the monarchies. They studied all this. And they put a stake in the ground about, hey, here are the core principles. Our rights don't come from government. They're endowed by our Creator. You create government to protect the rights you already possess. You understand government has a tendency to run amok, so you have to build checks and balances within those systems of separated powers. And there's really nothing, there's not many insights that they missed. Because ultimately they were talking about, how can people live in a free society and pursue their dreams and make the most of their God-given talents. And those underlying principles really don't change. They're as relevant today as they were then. The trappings change. The policy issues on the surface certainly change. Everything around us, how we do things, how we communicate, that all changes. But the underlying principles remain the same. So we've done a lot on civics. We've done our program for teachers to go through the civics training course. They get a $3,000 bonus. We've done millions and millions of dollars in bonuses for our teachers. We have probably now the best speech and debate, civics and debate initiative in the country, have these massive competitions. And I always say the value of speech, yes, we want kids to be able to get up there, express a viewpoint, and maybe even have a dialogue. We can't raise kids to just spend all day on the phone, texting or being on social media. Lord knows, subcontracting out thought to AI. I mean, it's really dangerous, I think, some of the stuff that some folks want to see for our society. So there's value in being able to do that generally. There's also value when you're in a debate program to say the debate is going to be on, Second Amendment. And maybe you're somebody that hasn't been terribly supportive. You may be called upon to argue in favor of those rights. So you're going to have to get out of your comfort zone and maybe think, okay, why do other people think differently than me? What assumptions do I have? What this? And I think it creates people that really have better open minds. A lot of higher education in recent years, particularly in places like Columbia and Harvard, it's all just about imposing orthodoxy. So these students really never have their assumptions questioned. Well, speech and debate, your assumptions get questioned, and you got to think deep. You got to defend your positions. You got to use logic. You got to reason. So I'm a big believer in it. I think it's taken off. I mean, it's done far better than I think we initially thought. We were just hoping we'd get a handful of people that'd be interested in it, and now it's been something that's really, really good. So all that is great, and we're happy to be able to trumpet that. Now, one of the issues you've seen percolating around in probably the last couple years, and this was an issue nationwide, was teacher vacancies, particularly in public schools. And there was a lot of attention on Florida just because that's what corporate media does. And so I would talk to my guys. I'd be like, well, where are we on this? And we were below the national average even then when they were trying to make an issue of it. But there was an issue nationwide. So we went ahead and we did a series of initiatives to be able to channel some good people into positions that were needed in our school system. And I'm pleased to announce that as a result of those efforts and as a result of Florida's emphasis on education, we've now reduced teacher vacancies for the 2025-2026 school year by another 17.7%. And so we're now, it's good. So just in the last 2 years, if you look at all the vacancies 2 years ago, we've now filled 30% of those. We are attracting teachers. We've dedicated more than $5.9 billion towards teachers and pay increases, as I mentioned earlier. We've expanded the number of pathways for qualified individuals. We have our teacher apprenticeship program. Right now, more than 80 individuals are receiving on-the-job training from veteran teachers while they pursue their teaching certification, and nearly 500 more have applied for the program. More than 100 military veterans have begun their teaching career through a temporary teaching certificate through our military veterans certification pathway. and nearly 700 more have applied for the program. So we're here now to say that's a job well done. And what, the rate is now 1% or?
Just under that.
Just under 1%, which is far below probably the national average at this point. Now they won't do, they'll, like California could be this, or New York or whatever, and then it's just interesting who decides to try to make issues of Florida stuff. But that's just the way it goes. We understand that. So that's where we are there. Now I'm going to get our panelists to be talking about that and some other issues. But the one thing I will say on teacher pay, budget was signed at the end of June. Budget went into effect on July 1st. The money's there. What we've seen, unfortunately, in some school districts, not all, and not even most, but some, I think we had 16, that delays giving the salary increases to the teachers. And some of that was because of school unions. And what they would do is they knew they had this money that had to go to teacher salaries, so they would withhold that as a bargaining chip to be able to extract other things for their agenda that have nothing to do with increasing teacher salaries. So we got in a situation where, like last year, you had 6, 7, 8 months went by where some of these unions were holding up the pay increases for the teachers. That is not right. And so we don't want that to happen this year. It's important to get these pay increases out the door now, especially leading into holidays. People need to have the resources. It's an important time of year to be able to do that. So we, and Commissioner Koumoutsas is going to be all over this. We're going to be monitoring who is stepping up to get the money in teachers' pocket and who is dragging their feet. But and some of these folks are going to say a little bit more about these unions. But they just had a big conference with the main teachers union nationally. I think it's American Federation of Teachers or one of them. And the stuff that they're doing these resolutions to adopt positions on whatever the trendy left-wing policy is. That it has nothing to do with educating the kids. And they become such blatant partisan operations that when they're withholding pay increases and using that, it's because they're trying to pursue this other agenda. And that's wrong. The schools are not the place for your agenda. The schools are the place to put the kids first and the parents first and to get that money in the pocket of the teachers, which is what it's intended to do. So we hope to see all of these pay increases processed in teachers' pockets as soon as possible. We're not going to just sit idly by and let this drag out for months and months on end. Where the teachers aren't getting what they need. So, these teacher unions, remember, when COVID happened, I said we have to have the kids in school. Now that was considered very controversial at the time. In fact, I don't know that there was anyone else saying that anywhere, any other governor. But it wasn't controversial if you actually looked at the data. If you got rid of the hysteria, if you ignored the media narratives, if you ignored the hysteria, if you ignored all that, and if you just focused on the data, it was obvious way back in the spring or summer 2020 when we were doing this that we needed to have kids in school. And it was interesting. Most of the teachers wanted to be back because they took pride in their role in these kids' lives. And it's like, okay, if kids can just sit on the couch and watch Zoom, then why do we have all these schools and stuff? Of course it's not as good. Of course you're not going to be able to do that. So we really said that. I remember Richard and we rolled that out, and oh my gosh, you would have thought that we were, it was, but the union opposed us. They sued us to try to lock kids out of school. If they had their way, they would have left the kids out of school indefinitely. And in some of the places where they run the show, they were locked out a long time in some of these places. And so, they would do these stunts like Richard's office. Richard, they have this. He had the biggest building. Stasi has it now in Tallahassee, the Department of Education building. First of all, you guys don't need that building that size, and they know that, and that's why we're doging state agencies in addition to local governments. And that was built long before I was there. But they would do these stunts where they would bring hearses and coffins and put them in front of the Department of Education, because they were trying to tell people, if you open school, all your kids are going to die. That's what they were trying to tell parents. And that was not justifiable. There was no data to suggest that. But that was the type of hysteria that was going on. And so, when that happened, I think a lot of people around the country saw these school unions for how partisan they'd become. And I kind of knew that before, but I don't know that it was as wide. And then you say, okay, who's fighting against your kid being able to get an education? It was those groups. And then come to find out, they've indulged on all these really, really strident leftist policies as if that should be what education is about. And so when I see them, slow walking pay increases, honestly, it's disappointing, but unfortunately, it's not surprising. So we can do better. We need to get that money out. And I'm really, really excited about the ability for the teachers to get that. And we'll come back for more next year when the legislature comes back in. As I said, I asked for more than what was eventually gotten. I think we can do better, and we're going to push to do better. Now, all right, so we're going to start with our Commissioner of Education now, Stasi Kamoutsis. Curriculum. It's really important to have strong curriculum. And I'll tell you, we started doing the reviews of these textbooks, and some of the nonsense they were trying to jam in there, it's just appalling to see what's going on. Now, we have a big enough school system, we're kind of the 800-pound gorilla. If we say no to a textbook, they've got to fix it, because the order would just be too big. So these guys, the department under Richard, under Manny Diaz, and under, they've had to go through, and some of this stuff is just blatant that they're putting in there. And it's total activism. So they've had to do that. We've seen across the country ridiculous things being jammed into school libraries, pornographic books, unfortunately, being jammed into school libraries. And I'm just thinking to myself, why is that something that any parent would want? And the reality is no parents want it. So you got to have, one, parents have the wherewithal and the ability to go in and police this and bring it up. But then you also have to have folks in the commissioner's office who are willing to do something about it. So where are we on the curriculum front, and how are we leading on that?
Thank you, Governor, and it's great to be here in Hillsborough County at the Hillsborough Academy of Math and Science. Thank you so much for hosting us. What a prestigious panel I'm on, but especially to be joined here with Jamie Suarez, our Teacher of the Year, who did a phenomenal job of representing educators this year. I've heard so much feedback throughout the state of the great work that she's been doing, connecting with teachers, and sharing what actually happens in Tallahassee. So appreciate you being here, Jamie. Governor, because of your leadership, Florida has absolutely been a model to the nation when it comes to curriculum. Whether it's our robust standards, whether it's the instructional materials that go through a very thorough process, as you just identified, Florida has led the nation in ensuring that we are prioritizing an education over indoctrination. But what you have seen at the teachers union at the national level over the past few years has been very concerning. For example, last year, 4th of July, as we were all celebrating with our families our nation's founding, you had the teachers union that same week hosting a conference. The NEA starts putting out these agenda items. Some of them are supporting these pro-Hamas terrorist agendas. Some of them are supporting open borders. They're supporting, social unrest, labor strikes. The list goes on. It's pure ideology. And then we saw what was unraveled this year around the same time through the American Federation of Teachers and Randy Weingarten, where there were resolutions that went forward. And some of these resolutions, as you look at them, it's very concerning what's being pushed at the national level. The push of pronouns in schools, the push of boys playing in female sports, pushing boys entering female locker rooms or female bathrooms. Even this climate change crisis that was peddled and cited by the teachers union, and this new partnership with what I call the Woke Economic Forum, not the World Economic Forum, who's pushing an agenda that now they're going to start creating a national curriculum to be imposed on our students. That's just totally inappropriate, and it's not going to happen here in the state of Florida. I'm proud that not only over the years have we ensured that we've built out the most robust state standards and ensured that our textbooks reflect what is age and developmentally appropriate for our students, but also this year, I know you signed an appropriation for $3 million to create essentially a statewide curriculum for English language arts beginning in grades kindergarten through 2nd grade. And that's a big deal because we know that literacy achievement by 3rd grade definitely impacts the trajectory of a child's life. And so I appreciate your leadership on that, but I know the districts are excited for when the curriculum is developed because it'll be at a much affordable rate for those districts. And so Florida continues to lead. You know, don't take my word for it. The governor was citing some of the crazy examples that we came across in textbooks. Let's talk about social studies. When we came across an example in kindergarten textbooks that talked about Colin Kaepernick, who was kneeling for the national anthem. Now, do you think that's age and developmentally appropriate for a kindergarten child to be taught our history and focus on the activism that's taking place where most folks would say is extremely disrespectful to this country's founding? And so that's the kind of stuff that we've seen where we've ensured is not taking place in our schools. And so I appreciate your leadership on this issue, and that's why Florida continues to be a model for the nation. So thank you, Governor.
Well, let me just say very clearly, because we've dealt with this in policy areas outside of education, like when we nuked ESG, World Economic Forum is dead on arrival in Florida. There's going to be no World Economic Forum in our curriculum in K through 12, no exceptions. That is unacceptable. Okay, Richard Corcoran. So Richard was Commissioner of Education during our first term, and we launched school choice, more school choice. We did a lot of stuff, but we really had to navigate COVID, and we saw how poorly that was navigated in some other states with kids with really irreparable harm because of not having access to sports and school and activities. And Richard, we leaned in at a time when nobody else really agreed with us. Got a lot of blowback, and I think that Richard became kind of public enemy #1 for these partisan left school unions. But I think we won every fight that we entered. So talk about your experience with that, how those entities were fighting against the best interests of kids, and how you've had to navigate that.
First, I'd say he keeps saying we. None of this happens without a strong governor. I mean, I could have been Commissioner of Education for anybody, and if they're not going to fight and be led to fight and say, go take these hills, I have your back, it doesn't happen. So I appreciate the we, but it's really you, Governor. I do want to start a little bit. The governor says it so well. He's even written a book about it. But, I think we have to go to the root cause. Like, what's the philosophy? What's the purpose of education? And for the history of mankind that the governor talked about, these enduring questions, these enduring histories that have been taught for centuries still exist today and still are relevant today. And the purpose of education during that time when we create Galileos and Newtons, I don't care if it's science, math, English, literature, art, all went to the fact that we, as the governor says, education exists to raise up great citizens and great people. And it is what makes us distinctly human. And when you get away from that and you say, okay, it's about getting a job, that's a byproduct of a great education. If you have a great education, you will always be employed. You will be taught humility. You'll be taught empathy. You'll be taught critical thinking. And those things lead to employment. And we just get away from it. And to the point of the World Economic Forum, it really is, their whole idea of an international curriculum, and you look at it, it's about work, jobs, creating these widget makers so that, and it's all about the workers. If we can, the workers, and we get good workers, and the workers do good things, and they'll be, and all of that sounds really, really familiar. It's called Karl Marx. He wrote a whole book about it, and it's really their World Economic, I think they call it Technology 4.0, or but it's really Marxism 2.0. It's massively failed, and it'll fail again. And it's led by billionaire elites who just want the proletariat recreated for their own benefit. And it's almost evil. It's a strong statement, but it really is. And it's been borne out that way for centuries. And you saw that same thing with the teachers union. What we need is to have students graduate from high school, have a world-class education, be taught what it means to be a great citizen and achieve in the world. And the #1 entity for the last 60, 70 years who has done everything they can to stop that, and we're not talking random, opinion. These are factual things that we can go through over and over and over as the teachers union. I always say the greatest threat, it's not, Putin's Russia, it's not China, it's not radical jihadism, it's education in America in massive decline. When you look at our NAEP scores, guess who did well on NAEP scores because they opened up schools? Florida and Governor DeSantis. Every other state pretty much has a declining NAEP scores, and the basics of English and math, they measure it by proficiency. 60+% of students in America, the rest of America, 60+% aren't proficient under the NAEP exam. And the people who are getting lost the most are your low-income earners, your people who are already struggling. Those are the students that are getting lost the most. And here's the perfect factual examples of why the teachers union is leading that charge. It's not, to the commissioner's point, all they care about is gender dysphoria or whatever, all these issues, while we're at that 60% threshold. We had a program where we said if you're a low-income student, you're struggling in school, and when the governor got elected, there were schools in Florida that were F. When you dropped your child off as a 5th grader in kindergarten, it was an F school. They went through 1st, 2nd, 3rd, all the way through 12th grade, and the entire time they were in that school, it was an F school. We might as well have just given the parents in kindergarten, here's a money-back guarantee, your child is going to be somewhere functionally illiterate and is going to struggle the rest of their lives. That's how bad it was. So we created a program that said, okay, if you're in that situation, you can go to a school of your choice, who sued to say poor, low-performing, low-economic students should not have that opportunity, and tried to stop it was the teachers union. I mean, and I said that lawsuit was the height of evil. It's just the worst of the worst. And it's the same thing the governor mentioned with opening schools. Who in all of these studies, and even the head of the teachers union, Randy Weingarten, now she comes out and she says, you know what, we led the charge to open schools. Literally. She literally says that. And I think the governor said at a press conference, well, it's interesting, Randy, that you say that, because in July of 2020, we pretty much remember the lawsuit you filed to shut us down and failed. But literally, this is how they reinvent the wheel. But she literally did that. And who got lost, who's suffering the most, are your low-income struggling students. Those are the ones that are dropping exponentially in the NAEP. And it's all led by a teachers union. They really, really do need to be stopped. And you've led the charge, whether it's the legislation to the anti-union legislation, and just fighting on all those things that really do matter. Curriculum. Are we really teaching kids how to be great citizens, and what makes them distinctly human? All of those things have been done in this 7 years, Governor. But you have an advocate here. The teachers union needs to be stopped, and what they're advocating for is ultimately the destruction of a wonderful country that we're about to celebrate the 250th anniversary of.